Hi everybody, it's Dr. Miller, and this is an introductory video to Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved. I am going to start us off with a review of Beloved at the time it was published. Since then, Toni Morrison won the Nobel Prize in Literature and is widely recognized, before she passed away recently, as the greatest living American writer. I'm not sure who the greatest living American writer is now, but, very clearly Toni Morrison was far and away incredibly talented. Margaret Atwood is Canadian, so she can't be the greatest American writer. Anyway, first of all, it is an honor for a well-regarded novelist like Margaret Atwood to sit down and write a thoughtful and thorough and comprehensive review of Morrison's book. Morrison had been, a leading figure in literature for long before this novel was published, but it's very rich and complex, and you could write endless papers about different things in it, which is why I chose it for a class like 3000, where people want to think about different ways of reading literature. If we're looking at the genre of Beloved, it would be it's a response to the kinds of slave narratives that we saw after the Civil War and around the time of the Civil War, where people would publish true accounts of enslaved people and what their experience was like. If you remember 12 Years a Slave, or that kind of narrative. Harriet Jacobs and other kinds of narrative, Frederick Douglass. But once, we kind of have in the 60s and 70s this flourishing of Black fiction writers, and you also have this flourishing of postmodern and disjointed, fragmented ways of working in fiction. And so a lot of Black writers would take the kind of genre of the novel and the genre of the slave narrative and take ownership of Blackness and the topic of slavery as represented in fiction. It was something that was often done for abolitionist ends, for political ends, and of course nothing is ever apolitical, but it was at that time a really big deal to be able to take ownership of literariness and literary culture and literary fiction, and a very empowering time for people to be writing. And Beloved, of course, is one of the major works of fiction like this. Others include Corregidora by Gail Jones, The Chaney'sville Incident by David Bradley. Let's see, what else am I forgetting? Oh, Flight to Canada by Ishmael Reed. So there's a lot of books that are kind of in this space of, the legacies of race in America and kind of how they work out in postmodern fiction. What we find in this review is that from basically the second this novel was published, and this is a review from the New York Times, so many people would have read it, it was instantly regarded as a masterpiece of fiction. Just to look at the text here from Margaret Atwood, who wrote The Handmaid's Tale and other works, and is still alive and working. That Morrison's versatility, technical and emotional range appear to know no bounds. Of a preeminent American novelist of her own or any other, generation. Beloved will put them to rest. And then she gives a really great teaser here. It's a hair raiser. And it is, because it is many kinds of story at once. There's, as I talked about with postmodern representation, you look at a lot of the kind of fragmented nature of time and non-linearity. So if you watch a film with postmodern influence, if you look at like Quentin Tarantino's earlier work like Pulp Fiction, you have this, narrative that might seem to move from beginning to end, but then you realize if you were to try to reconstruct it from, the actual time to the end of actual time, it would look very different. And one of the reasons for that is in the years following the Second World War, there were a lot of ways of kind of overturning and upending the way people thought about history. It's not just a march toward progress. Unthinkable things can happen, even in civilized societies. And postmodernism was partly a response to that. Works like this are also fragmented and use that fragmentation to show some of the gaps in understanding that people will always have. Enslaved people were punished if they knew how to read and write, and so we will never have enough stories of what it was like. We will have some, but we will never have the full series of narratives and experiences of people who experienced it. And Beloved is a book that helps to, offer its own version of what a narrative could have been. So it's set during the period of so-called Reconstruction, when a great deal of random violence was let loose upon Black people, both the slaves freed by emancipation and others who had been given or bought their freedom earlier. And then the flashbacks and the flash forwards, that's what we get in the postmodern, kind of setting, to a more distant period when slavery was still a going concern in the South, and the seeds for the bizarre and calamitous events of the novel were sown. The setting is similarly divided. The countryside near Cincinnati, people moved north to Ohio, which is right up across the border from Kentucky. So they go back and forth. And the slaveholding plantation was called Sweet Home, and it was, neither of those things. And so Sethe is the main character, and her daughter Denver as well. And they're living in this farmhouse in kind of the middle of nowhere in Ohio. And her mother-in-law, Baby Suggs. And she is right that it's hard to discuss this novel without giving away the plot, and I wanted to make sure that I at least gave you this for some context without a lot of spoilers. But it is also a ghost story, and that is something that becomes evident right away. And the ghost there is angry, sad, malicious, and it's Sethe's baby daughter who died very violently years before when she was 2. We never know her full name, but she kind of becomes Beloved, the sort of spirit of what is in the novel. That's what's on her tombstone, and as Atwood mentions, this incredibly resonant moment in the novel, where, how do you pay for your child's memorial if you have nothing? And it was, through sex work, that she was able to, bury her child, which is just, that's, as Atwood says here, we're human beings, are merchandise, everything has its price, and price is tyrannical. And so the ghost story is this baby kind of almost having a supernatural presence in the house where they see little handprints in the cake, pools of light, breaking dishes, like a poltergeist, kind of. So yeah. And so poor Denver, her daughter, is, lonely and kind of sad and doesn't really have anyone to play with. And so the baby ghost ends up being like a sister to her. This is true that all the main characters in the book believe in ghosts, so it is natural for this one to be there. We're lucky this, ghost is a baby, my husband or your husband's spirit was to come back in here, it'd be a lot worse. And in fact, Sethe would rather have the ghost there than not there because it's her child, and it's better to have the ghost of her child than to have silence, than to have nothing. And so I'll move back here. It is, it is violent, it is difficult to read and experience sometimes. My hope is that the literariness offsets, some of the difficult and challenging content. There are also incredible sections. There's a section kind of toward maybe around the 2/3 mark of the novel, I'm thinking. It's referred to as the middle passage section, and it seems very confusing. It is just brilliant and beautifully done and incredibly written. So the middle passage, for those of you who might not know, was the time when, after someone had been, enslaved for in whatever way, sometimes someone local to their village, sometimes a European person came and got them, took them. It just depended on the circumstances. But it was often you would be put on a boat in just terrible circumstances with people dying, and when people are treated like cargo, you put as many people as possible together as you can. And the lack of certainty or understanding, because people didn't come back and explain much about what people were getting into. You would just be put in this dark place on a boat and have no idea whether you were going to live or die. It's total confusion. And so when you get to a very confusing section of the book, that's why it is there like that. It's an attempt to represent what in many ways is unrepresentable. We know what faced people here when they moved to America or the early colonies before this time period. But if you were just kind of taken from somewhere, thrown in a boat with people who might not have even spoken your language, your regional dialect, in your village or wherever, whatever part of Western Africa in many cases you were from, it's almost impossible to represent, but it's almost in that way essential to represent it or find ways to talk about it. And Morrison does that here, and it's an incredible gift to all of her readers. And so this novel, I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that this gives you some enthusiasm and some context for it. It's a stressful read, so take your time with it. You'll get through it, and I hope that it's something that these characters become part of your thinking and part of your reading experience. So anyway, thank you so much.